had a quickie in the coat closet at his work event. He got his revenge on the spot. Hello, Reddits, for anonymity's sake. All the names I will be using will be fake. My name is Sandra, and I'm 25 years old. I think I've ended up ruining my life and even my career as a writer. Every bookstore keeps returning my books, and they are refusing to sell them anymore. And the schools I supply books to are now asking for a refund too. It doesn't help matters that every other aspect of my life is receiving the same negativity, and I feel so terrible. I have no one on my side and everything just feels really awful. And it's all my fault. I did this to myself, and words can really not express how terrible I feel about it all. My fiancé, whom I'm supposed to be getting married to in 3 weeks' time, had not only canceled our wedding, but had publicly disgraced me and made sure that everyone knew what a terrible bitch I am. It still isn't his fault. I really did behave badly. No, horribly. I had a quickie in the coat closet at Dan's work event, and he found out, and he got his revenge right on that spot. I remember the look on his face when he opened that closet and saw me with his business partner and best friend Rick. I honestly didn't know that Dan had followed me when I sneaked off to meet Rick in his office when he texted me to come. I thought I was perfectly safe and that my secret was protected. Turns out it's not, because now my life is completely ruined. Dan wasn't supposed to find out like that. He wasn't ever supposed to find out about it. It was supposed to be something that was going to forever be a secret between Rick and I, and we were planning to stop. We were supposed to have done so, but Rick just managed to convince me to have that one last time with him, because he apparently was going to miss me after I got married to Dan. I met Dan and Rick around the same time. Actually, I met Rick first, but even though I was interested in him, I was too scared to date him because of how handsome he is. He was an easy flirt and easily caught ladies' eyes, and I hesitated when he approached me. I was playing hard to get, wondering whether he would pursue me for that long or hold out if he really meant his feelings. But then I met Dan, who was clearly from the start interested in me and never ceased to show it. Rick backed off even before Dan had any interest in me. They were business partners and best friends, as I have stated before, but it was always shocking because of how different they were from each other. While Dan is meticulous, attentive, caring, never made impromptu decisions, and never took risks except with work. Rick was a risk taker. He made lots of decisions on his feet, both good and bad, and he was a big flirt and lover of women. I knew I had no chance with Rick, except I wanted my heart broken, so when Dan started paying attention to me and finally asked me out, I agreed. Dan was everything I could have ever dreamt of and hoped for in a man. He took care of me and was always thinking about me. He bought me gifts without an occasion, and he took me out on several dates. He was understanding and never forced me to do anything, including sex. He never pushed or forced me to accept his decision, and he always made sure I knew that he loved me. He was perfect. He almost had no blemish. But my mind maybe kept looking for ways to undermine what we had. I was self-absorbed and selfish. I was also greedy, and I tried really hard to stop feeling the way I did about Dan, but I just couldn't. I couldn't stop comparing Dan to Rick every time, especially on days when we meet up, and on Rick's arms is another different woman who probably would have thought she's the one to change him. I kept wishing that Dan was more fun like Rick was. It was easy to laugh around Rick with his teasing and the way he always would wink at the end of each conversation. I had never seen him serious before, even with their business, because Dan did most of the work. I kept comparing how Rick easily made words look easy, while Dan found it difficult to express himself, especially when he was trying to make some joke. I kept wishing he was half as handsome as Rick, and had Rick's eye color. Call me greedy. I know, I really was greedy, wishing for those things when Dan couldn't exactly change who he is physically or socially to match my standards. But I didn't think I was wrong at that moment. I was only wishing inside me. I never needed to say it out loud to anyone, even to my friends. Dan was the one who helped me build my writing career. He had someone in the publication company and had helped me get to the person, and now I write and publish books for kids. Well, not anymore. Not with everything that's happening right now. Dan and I were together for 2 whole years before he actually proposed, and before he did, I was already sleeping with Rick. It happened a month before Dan's proposal to me. I didn't mean for the first time to happen. It had just sort of happened, and even though I felt guilty afterwards, Rick assured me that we weren't doing anything bad so long Dan and I weren't married yet, and I believed him. The first time it happened had been that particular day when Dan had to travel for work. He was supposed to go with Rick, but apparently Rick was hungover from the wild night he had the previous day and couldn't travel that morning with Dan. But that afternoon, Dan had begged me to give Rick an important document he had forgotten at home so he could bring it with him the next day when he would go to meet him. Rick was supposed to leave early in the morning the next day, so I decided to go give it to him that evening instead of waiting till the next morning. I went to Rick's apartment and I got there in time to see a woman walking out of his apartment rather angrily. I was sure he had broken her heart in some way, but I didn't exactly care. When Rick finally opened the door for me, he was wearing nothing except a very tight boxer, and instead of collecting the documents and letting me leave, he opened the door wide open and invited me in for a drink. I shouldn't have gone in. I know I shouldn't have, but I did anyway, and took his offer of the drink when he brought one. Rick said nothing to me, and I had no idea what to say either, and it got really awkward after some minutes, so I finished up my drink and made to leave, but Rick held my hand and just pulled me to himself. Without any words, he kissed me. I kissed him back instead of pushing him away, and apparently that had encouraged him to go even further when he started fumbling with the zippers of my dress. And instead of stopping everything that was happening, I did nothing but watch him do it, until there just was nothing left in between us. No barriers of clothes, just our bare bodies and our mouths, mostly mine making lots of moaning sounds. I was breathless, shocked, and very naked by the time the whole thing ended. I couldn't believe that I just cheated on my boyfriend with his best friend. But Rick didn't seem to mind because he got up naked and poured another cup of whiskey into the 2 glasses and handed me one. Rick was nonchalant about what had happened between us and told me that he had always been attracted to me and only took a step back when Dan came into the picture. I wanted to remind him that he took a step back before Dan came into the picture, but I said nothing and instead drank the drink he placed in my hand. I wanted so desperately to believe him. I wanted it to be true that Rick really did like me, and I wasn't just another conquest on his bedpost. That evening, I went back home feeling all sorts of ways. I couldn't even pick up Dan's calls when he called in the evening to check in on me. I felt somehow guilty, but I couldn't stop the feeling of exhilaration that came with having sex with Rick. Besides being a handsome man who knew how to win a woman's heart, he was also good sexually, and before the end of the next week I was wishing I was back in his bed or couch or wherever he would choose to have me. Dan was also good sexually, and before I ever slept with Rick at all, I thought having sex with Dan was my best one so far. But I had a change of heart after that night. Dan's performance was just paled in comparison to Rick's, and I couldn't stop wishing I had one more night with him, and I did. I did have one more night with him, and even more than one night because soon after that day, Rick and I started sleeping with each other more frequently than I could even count. After that night with Rick, a week passed successfully, and nothing happened between us, even though in my head and dreams, it did countless times. I knew that Rick was taking a step back and wanted me to take the initiative, and I did when I was starting to go crazy, just thinking of another time with him. I waited until Dan had to leave town. He had a business meeting with a potential client out of town and had gone to represent him and Rick there. I went over to Rick's house after texting him to ask if he was home. If he was surprised that I had his number, he didn't say because I never had called or texted him before that day, but I did have his number right from the very first day he approached me and had given to me. I never deleted it, hoping then that he was really serious with me, but then I met Dan, and everything had passed in a blur. So I went to his place, and when he opened the door, I entered, waited for him to close the door, before removing my dress to reveal what I was wearing underneath. Sexy lingerie. I knew that Rick had a fetish for women in lingeries, especially sexy ones. I overheard him one time telling Dan about it and telling him how greatly it turned him on. I never wore lingeries, so I had to go out and buy one nervous that I wouldn't get the result I wanted, but I did get what I wanted, because Rick wasted no time in reaching for me and then proceeding to peel the lingerie off my body. The things he did to me that night were so erotic, and I couldn't stop going back for more. I bought different lingerie and started wearing them, never mind the fact that I was uncomfortable in them, and that's why I didn't fancy them initially, but I was willing to take the risk of being uncomfortable if it made Rick behave like a caveman. Dan was surprised to see me change most of my underwear into lingeries, and when he asked, I told him I wanted to try something different, and Dan had said nothing about it. He only commented once that he wasn't comfortable seeing me wearing such tight things, but he said nothing after that, though, especially after I turned it into a huge argument between us. I continued sleeping with Rick, and it was just wild. We had sex everywhere we got the chance to, sometimes even inside his office, where I would sneak to first before I went to Dan's office, pretending I came to surprise him at work with lunch. We even had sex about 3 or 4 times in the apartment I shared with Dan. I honestly lost count of how many times we had sex because of how often it occurred. I liked the fact that he wasn't tired of me and that he wanted me every time. I knew he didn't love me. I tried not to delude myself of that fact, and there was the fact that I actually did love Dan. What Rick and I had was just purely sexual attraction, and I was fine with how frequently it occurred because it meant to me that I was irresistible, especially to someone as handsome as Rick. I know how I behaved terribly, and I know that I should never have even started the whole thing with Rick, but once I started, I just couldn't bring myself to stop. I was always there anytime he wanted me, and it was like the sex got even better each time because of how Rick was always trying something or somewhere different. When Dan proposed to me, I was beyond happy. He did so on my birthday, and Rick was present too, pretending to be happy and even slapping Dan's back and congratulating him. But I knew he was jealous, and that had shown in the rough way he did have sex with me that evening when I went over to his place after Dan had to leave for some emergency at work. I knew I had to stop seeing Rick, especially after marriage to Dan, but I just couldn't bear the thought, so I gave myself a time frame. I managed to convince Dan to shift the wedding to 2 months' time instead of the wedding that same month as Dan had wanted us to. I wanted that so I would have the chance to get Rick out of my system. But what Dan thought was that I was having cold feet and wanted us to be sure of the next step we were taking, so he didn't object when I suggested it. So I told Rick I wanted just 1 month with him, and he agreed to it. We agreed to stop a month before the wedding, and that was supposed to be the rule, and we did stop. Well, I tried for us to stop after that 1 month, but Rick kept finding one way or the other for us to get together. It was either he seduces me back into bed, or he creates a situation where we had to be alone and then kisses me into agreeing to one more time until that last time, which had totally ruined everything. Dan and Rick had a work event planned for their company by the company they were to partner with on a particular project. Dan had worked so hard to get that proposal approved while Rick did his usual, tried to flirt or bribe his way through to the top, but he couldn't this time because the rules were strict and unbendable, and Rick almost ruined everything for Dan when he tried to bribe one of the directors, and it had backfired. But Dan was able to get them to revise the proposal and choose to work with them until the condition that Rick was just a laid-back part of the work and wasn't involved in any major decision-making, and it was always so with the other projects anyway, so it wasn't a big deal, and Dan had been able to win the bid. So, as some way to celebrate and also to further seal their relationship as business partners, they had decided to organize a little event, and Dan had suggested it being held in their company, and they agreed. I was, of course, Dan's date for the event, and Dan made Rick promise not to bring anyone that would jeopardize their already fragile relationship with the company, and he promised not to. He did bring someone. One fine and young lady, gentle and always smiling at everyone. She was so pretty I was jealous of her, and I tried hard to be civil with her and enjoy the party while watching Dan civilize and make his business partners laugh hard. It was only then I realized that Dan could be funny if he wanted to be, but he never did make any effort to be with me. Well, to be honest, he did. I just didn't find him funny because I never tried to do so. I never pegged him as someone who had a funny side. But then my attention had been dragged away from him when I got a text from Rick. He wanted me to come to his office. He said he needed me, and when I texted him my refusal, he texted back swearing that it was the last time. He promised that he was never going to disturb me again afterwards, and I finally agreed. He was apparently sulky because no one paid any attention to him that evening. Everyone wanted to talk to Dan or hear what Dan had to say, and no one cared about him or bothered to involve him in any conversation throughout the night. I thought that with Dan's back turned to me, he wouldn't notice that I sneaked away from the party. So I did. I sneaked away after giving some excuse about using the bathroom to Rick's date, whom he abandoned over an hour before he texted me, and I went to his office. He wanted to have me against the desk, desperate for some release, but I insisted on going into the closet, which was big enough for 2 people. I didn't want to risk anyone walking in on us, and I didn't get to close the door of the office because of how Rick had immediately dragged me to him and was kissing me. He finally agreed, and we went into the closet. I knew with the way he was feeling, we would possibly be done in 5 minutes, so I just thought 5 minutes wasn't a long time to be gone to the bathroom. But the most shocking thing had happened within that 5 minutes, because the door of the closet had opened from outside, and I saw Dan standing there looking from me to Rick in shock and then anger. I was still bent over at the knee and holding onto the wall with my dress halfway up my waist and my panties down my legs, while Rick was behind me with his boxers and trousers down his legs too. Dan said nothing to both of us, as we all stared at each other in shock, none of us moving from the position we were in, and I only pushed Rick away when Dan took out his phone and took a picture of us in that position and then walked away angrily. I quickly wore my clothes and rushed after Dan, panicking, and when I finally found Dan, he had gotten to the stage and picked up the mic. He announced right there on stage that he was forfeiting his partnership with Rick and was firing him on the spot, and he was also ending his engagement with me and wanted nothing to do with both of us. He told everyone there that he had caught both of us in the closet having sex right in the office, and he proceeded to forward everyone a copy of the picture he had taken of Rick and I. Apparently, Dan was the sole owner of the company and only tagged Rick along when he had nothing for himself. I never knew that piece of information until that day when Dan had publicly fired him and me in the process too, only not as his business partner or employee, being the right word, but as his fiancé. I had over hundreds of people turning to stare at me after seeing the picture Dan sent them. They thought of me as disgusting, and it showed on their faces obviously that they thought of me as a sex worker. I felt so ashamed and embarrassed, and I kept crying and trying to reach Dan to beg him, but he signaled the security to throw me out and instructed another one to find Rick and do the same to him. I kept trying to struggle so I could get to Dan. I wanted to plead with him. I wanted him to hear me out, even though I had no exact words to say. I wanted him to just give me a chance to beg properly. But I, of course, didn't have a chance against the bulky and muscular security guard that was asked to throw me out, and I was out of the main doors of the company faster than I could blink. I stayed outside the company long enough to find out that Rick was never found, because no one threw him out like they did me. He had probably fled after Dan caught us, the coward. I couldn't believe what was happening, and I went home to wait for Dan, hoping that by the time he got back, he would be calm enough to listen to me. But that too had taken a wrong direction down the drain, because when Dan finally came home the next morning, not even that night that I spent waiting for him anxiously through the night, he had been so livid to see me in his house, and had called for guys to throw me out with my bags. Not a single item that belonged to me was left behind. The only thing that Dan had taken away from me was the ring on my finger, the one he proposed with. He told me I wasn't worth owning that expensive gift, and then finally slammed the door in my face. I cried so hard, and I kept trying to get inside the house, but the door wouldn't bulge. Ringing the doorbell several times didn't get anywhere, nor did banging the door. I ended up spending hours on the staircase outside the house, and when I realized that Dan didn't care anymore whether I froze outside in my nightwear, I managed to drag myself to a friend's place and lied to her about having some emergencies. I told her that I couldn't get into the house and that I couldn't reach Dan. I knew she probably had questions about my whole load, but she said nothing, thankfully, and had allowed me to spend the night at her place. But the next morning, she was eager for me to leave her house, telling me bluntly that I couldn't stay with her. She threw me out, and I was so shocked because I didn't know the reason. It was only when I saw the post that I realized that she had good reasons to send me out. Dan had apparently sent the picture to our group. The group was made by Dan for the wedding, where everyone, including our parents, were in it. I was so shocked and kept on crying. I knew my religious parents wouldn't let me into their home again, so I didn't even bother going there. The bitter way the people in that group were addressing me made me feel even more awful. The people I once knew and respected, and they accorded the same level of respect to me. It was obvious I had lost the respect they had for me, and it feels really terrible. And there's the fact that somehow the news got to literally everywhere, including the bookstore I sold my books at, and also the kindergarten I supply books to, and they now want absolutely nothing to do with me. They probably are scared the kids that read my books would end up like I have. ridiculous, but still nobody wanted to take that risk, I guess. I know that I messed up and deserve everything that's coming to me, but the problem is, even though I feel bad being treated like trash right now, I feel even more horrible knowing that Dan now hates me. I wish there was some way to go back in time and undo the damage I've caused. I wish I could just get a second chance with Dan, even if I have to spend the rest of my life groveling at his feet. Is there really something or anything I can do? Update. Hello Reddits, this is my last post here, and actually today is my wedding day. It's been exactly 3 weeks since I first posted here, and life has just gotten better. Dan finally decided to forgive me and put everything behind him, and he's even willing to continue with our wedding and marry me. We will surely have a happy life and peaceful home because I've learned such bitter lessons that I'm never going to repeat in my life, and I just wanted to thank you guys for your supportive comments because it helped a lot. Everyone is leaning towards forgiveness for me, and they all understand how terribly sorry I feel for doing all of that to Dan. Rick is no longer a part of our lives. Dan cut him off completely, and I know that we are going to live a happy life without Rick in it. It's a lie. Everything I wrote above are all lies, just figments of my imagination. Funny how I desperately wish that was the truth. I wish so much that this might be exactly what I would come back here with, but instead I'm here stuck in this harsh reality of life. Today truly is my wedding day, but there's clearly no wedding happening. I'm here stuck in this tiny room wishing that I was in that hotel room already booked for me by Dan, so I could dress up and have my girls' night before our wedding, and also because it was bad luck seeing the bride before the wedding itself. But I'm here instead of being there typing away and crying as I do, so wishing that I had the chance to be with Dan again. I regret everything so much. I regret ever meeting Rick or ever thinking an affair with him was the right decision to make. I regret ever sacrificing everything I have with Dan for a fleeting affair, and especially with someone like Rick. The same person who hadn't even bothered to look for me or call me to check on me and see how I'm coping with the consequences of our actions. The same coward who fled the scene of our crimes, leaving me alone to face over 100 strangers looking at me with disgust, clearly written on their faces. I never should have. I really never should have, and I regret it so much. I wish I could just turn back the hands of time and undo everything. I wish I could undo every part about meeting Rick and hold on to every part with Dan in it. Dan never deserved what I did to him. He was kind and gentle, the kind of man any woman would be lucky to have, but I had thrown that away, and I just wish that I could undo this horror that is now my life. The worst part of everything is the loneliness. I feel so lonely, it's almost like an itch that will never go away. It hovers over me like a plague, and I feel so drained having to deal with all of these with no one here to support me and help me through this season of my life. It's sad that I came here as my last hope, thinking and praying desperately that even if not all but someone out there somewhere will understand that I messed up and I'm willing to change. I came here hoping that I could get some advice to at least get me in Dan's good books, even if it wasn't completely. But sadly, I got nothing but shame and cruel comments. I know I deserve all that is coming to me. I know that I'm a horrible person, and I know I don't deserve to find peace even though I desperately want to. But you guys just made it even worse. My thoughts are so messed up right now, and I feel so depressed and lonely, and the feeling keeps growing rapidly each day. I regret everything I've ever done to Dan. I regret ever thinking that he wasn't a man just because he showed me love. I should have appreciated having someone like that in my life. I should have respected him right in front of him and behind him. I should have never let my friends come up with stupid names to compare him with. I should have never taken his love for granted, because now all I'm left with are painful memories of how badly I treated Dan's love for me. I realize now, only too late, just how important Dan is to me, now that I don't have any access to him. Living in this cold, empty room with barely enough space to breathe is devastating, especially when the bare room reminds me of all the memories of what I had but lost out of carelessness and selfishness. It's crazy how much you can miss something just after you've lost it. I miss him so much. I miss his laughter. I miss the way he cares for me, the way he worries about me. I feel awful that Dan no longer loves me, the thought of him moving on without me, the thought that he would probably meet someone better, the thought that he will forget totally about me, except the one feeling he probably has towards me now, which most definitely is hatred. The fact that he will move on with another woman who definitely isn't me hurts like crazy. I wish I had never thought to cheat, especially with a man like Rick, who at the end of the day was nothing but a coward. He wasn't the real man. Rick never was. I cannot believe I kept comparing Rick and Dan when they were like two parallel lines that could never cross each other. Now I see clearly everything I was blinded to, and I regret that it took me this long to see. When everything's already damaged beyond repair. This feeling of loneliness is the worst. Having no one to talk to or no one to care about you is just terrible. I have no friends. My family are still ignoring me and refusing to have anything to do with me. I have no work to get to, except the part-time jobs that I have to work daily now, because I have no money and need to survive. I wish I could take back everything. I wish I could alter everything, starting with the way I had carefully destroyed everything that Dan and I shared. I keep imagining how everything would have been. We probably would be done with our vows and only now preparing for the wedding dinner. Dan and I had planned for a wedding dinner instead of an immediate after party. I suggested it, and Dan had agreed to it. I will probably be preparing to wear that beautiful yellow gown I bought a month ago for dinner, and my ring, my only jewelry, and with Dan by my side as my husband, we would go around each table to greet our guests, who would be quite small because of how Dan wanted a small wedding. I had been able to get him to agree to 100 guests after lots of persuading. My cheeks would probably hurt from smiling too much and saying thank you countless times instead of hurting from crying too hard. And I probably would have a bag packed to go on our honeymoon, which was supposed to last a whole week in my favorite city. I feel so terrible knowing that I will never get that chance with Dan again. I've lost him, and that is just the most terrible feeling ever. I cannot believe that I've lost everything. Every day is a big, empty, and painful reminder of everything I've done to lose Dan. I keep remembering the look on his face that horrible day when he caught me red-handed with Rick in that closet. I feel so ashamed, remembering just how his face had twisted from shock to anger. I remember how he held that mic and announced the demise of our relationship before sending everyone that shameful picture. Trying to talk to him since then has been like trying to get through a brick wall. He has blocked me off everywhere, and with no access to him, it feels like true life horror. My heart and head are at war every day with themselves. My heart is in pain every moment, remembering and missing Dan so much, and my head reminding my heart exactly what it cannot have, because I made a terrible decision. Now I'm left to wonder how life would have been with Dan if I hadn't lost him. Dan and I had agreed to start having kids immediately after our wedding, so I wonder if our wedding night, which is supposed to be in a few hours from now, would be day one of our adventure into having our first baby. But I can never know now, can I? I ruined every chance of that happening, and now I can never have it anymore. I wouldn't get the chance to know what it feels like to be pregnant with Dan's baby. I wouldn't get spoiled by him like he had always promised. Every night I go to sleep wishing the same thing, that I wake up and find out I was only having a terrible dream, and I was right back where I always was, like I never left in Dan's arms. But then I wake up every day gasping for air, dreaming about that horrible day when I had ruined my life with my own actions. I regret everything so badly, and I wish I could turn back the hands of time, but I know that I cannot do so. I will forever be stuck here trying to remedy what cannot be. I will be here in this bottomless pit of self-imposed hell, suffering for every sin I committed against Dan. It's hurtful knowing I can never go back. I could never make amends. And even if I did, no matter how hard I tried, Dan will never see me the same way again. He will never forgive me or look at me with love in his eyes. There's the agony of remembering his eyes alone, just after an evening of finding out about the horrible things I did. Talk less of a lifetime of viewing me with that same lens, or even something deeper, something with deeper resentment and hatred for me. I know that I will spend my lifetime serving this jail time of no Dan, and it's just horrible that I'm barely a month in, and I feel so terrible. It's just totally awful. Goodbye, guys.